Hi, I'm with Mark J. Ferrari, who well-known artist turned author. Mark, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
I'm going to talk a little bit about your art before we move on to your writing, because I know you're really big on your writing right now. First of all, your artwork is absolutely fantastic. I just cannot espouse enough about how just wonderful it is. My two favorite pieces personally are Stories for a Secret Friend and I can't remember, Bookworm. Those are my two personal favorite, really nice. But I was kind of thrown for a loop last year when I heard that you were turning to writing. So I'm like, why would the fantastic artist go to writing? Can you give me a little more insight on that?
Well, not surprisingly, had a lot to do with a blow to the head. That's how a lot of writing careers begin, I think, I've heard. I've always been a voracious reader since I was in 4th grade. Our teacher was enlightened enough in the early 60s to read us The Hobbit in the 4th grade, and once I discovered such literature existed, I've been a voracious reader of fantasy literature. And since at least college, have really been interested in writing. I had stories I wanted to tell, and I was very interested in being a writer, but I also had this artistic talent going, and interest in that and opportunities to exercise that talent simply showed up first, and there were a lot of them, and I ended up doing that for many years. And then in 2000, I was out riding my mountain bike on a logging road near the small town that I lived in at the time. Rode around a sharp hairpin turn into the grill of an oncoming truck, and we totaled each other. Within a year after that accident, as I recovered from it, discovered that I could no longer render in colored pencil as I had before. No mechanical damage was done, but there was just some sort of synaptic communication between my head and my hand that had been derailed. And I actually, for a number of years, made quite an effort to relearn those skills, and they just weren't coming back. At that point, what commercial art I continued to do was done digitally, and with such a big hole carved out of my art practice, I actually had the time and the incentive to take the writing a little more seriously. And within a few more years, I had a novel being published. And I just found that I enjoyed writing every bit as much, more actually, than I think I've ever enjoyed art, as much as I did enjoy art. A picture may be worth 1,000 words, but 1,000 words is worth 100 pictures. And I have a head full of stories, have had that head full of stories all my life, and had up to that point been trying to get them out one painful frame at a time in pictures. And now I've discovered I can paint hundreds of pictures a day in words. I can get those stories out faster and better, and frankly to a larger audience. I have every reason to believe that in less than a year, 30 or 40,000 people have read this story already, and as far as I know, that's probably more people than have ever seen my art altogether in all the years that I was an artist. So I am enjoying it more. I am getting my stories out faster and more effectively. My writing is every bit as visual as my art was. People who read this story say, I can see everything you're talking about, and that's because for me it is all about capturing vivid visual images in my mind. Whether I'm doing it as an artist or a writer, it's the same thing. And I am reaching an even larger audience than I reached before. So for me, it's all good.
Yeah, and art truly is about communication. It's the medium of how you choose to communicate.
That's right.
You're still very much an artist. You've always been an artist.
Mm-hmm.
You always will be an artist. It's just now your medium has just changed from Prismacolor pencil to typewriter.
Right. And the change, to me, imagine that Michael Jordan had played baseball all his life and then discovered basketball. That's how I feel. I was okay as an artist. I did a decent job, but
I think you did more than a decent job, but that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, well, Michael Jordan was a good enough athlete that he could play decent baseball, but he never would have been a superstar at that. I think that in writing I have found my sport, and it's writing. So I'm very glad, actually, that life maneuvered me into this transition.
That is absolutely fantastic. Now, I noticed the cover of your book, The Book of Joby, which, of course, you can get at Amazon, or better yet, go buy from your independent bookstore. But your book is pretty much a fantasy book, but it doesn't look like most fantasy covers that I've seen.
No, it's just typed, just the title and my name and a quote from Kevin Anderson, and a little dragon on the book to let people know that it's a fantasy, I think, even though there is no dragon in the story, nor does anybody really even mention a dragon in the story.
I think I recognize that dragon. That was the dragon from The Dream?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The original plan was to put a piece of my artwork called The Dream on the cover of this book, but at the last minute, the buyers from the chain stores convinced Tor that they thought the book had an even larger audience than science fiction fantasy readers, a big mainstream audience, and they wanted to sell it to that larger audience, but they couldn't do it with a fantasy cover. So they basically convinced Tor to remove the fantasy cover and put on this literary type cover. And, well, it seems to have worked. And not only has the book sold very, very well, but an awful lot of my readers who write to me about liking the book basically say they're not fantasy readers, but they really enjoyed this novel. So it was a decision, I think, to sell the book to science fiction and fantasy readers, but also to a mainstream audience, and they wanted a mainstream cover to do it.
Well, it's one of those things where, sometimes the distributor and the retailer actually do know what they're talking about. Can you just talk a little bit about the book and what it's about?
Sure. Basically, I started with this premise about the bet. It was a story about the devil and God making a bet over a very well-behaved old man named Job. He had wealth and respect and basic health, everything a man could want. And he was also really, really well behaved, very faithful in God. And the devil basically suggested one day that he was only so faithful because he had everything he wanted. And if you took it all away, he wouldn't be faithful anymore. So I took the premise of that bet between God and the devil, and I took the Arthurian myth cycle, the whole tragic love triangle between Arthur, Lancelot, and Guinevere, and Camelot, and the Grail quest, and all of that. And I shook it all up in a paper bag and poured it out into contemporary California with the initial premise that that bet between God and the devil didn't just happen once to Job in the Old Testament, but has happened over and over and over through history, and the devil keeps coming back and saying, let's try this one more time. I'm sure I've got all the bugs worked out now. And this time, the focus of their wager is a 9-year-old fourth grader named Joby Peterson, living a charmed life in a pleasant California suburb, and the book follows his life until he's in his late 30s when the wager is finally resolved. The book sort of has this Judeo-Christian context, but it's not actually intended to be, and I do not think it is actually, a religious or a Christian book. It's a fantasy novel. It's just that I decided to set my fantasy novel in my own culture's mythology instead of in some exotic Norse or Celtic or Asian mythology, as so many fantasy novels are set. So the story is really about us. It's not about God. It's not about Lucifer. It's not about religion, although all of those things appear in the book. It's about us, and it's about all kinds of people. And there are 30-some-odd villains in this book. And the one thing, the only thing they all have in common is that they are all convinced that they are right. They are so convinced that they are right that there is nothing they won't do in the name of what they are sure they are right about. There is no group that I am focusing on here. It doesn't matter what group or agenda you're part of. It's just this theme of people who are absolutely convinced that they're right and that they're so right that anything they do is justified.
So this isn't a fairy tale. This is a human tale.
This is a human tale, but it's certainly set in a fairy tale context. There is magic in this book. There are wizards, there are fairies, there are angels, there are demons, and there's an awful lot of the real world in it, too. All of those things are in this book. But although it is set in a Judeo-Christian context, it's just not intended to be Christian literature, and it's not even really intended to be some sort of straight interpretation of the book of Job. It starts with the same kind of bet, but then it goes off in its own direction.
And with, 16,000, 17,000 copies sold, that's a pretty good tale.
Yeah,
I would have to say
so.
that I think that's a pretty good tale.
Happily, I'm hearing from a lot of people who are really enjoying it, and happily, a lot of them are Christian, and a lot of them aren't, and they all seem to be just fine with it.
So before we sign off, is there anything else you wanted to talk about? Anything upcoming in the future that we need to be aware about? I've seen your website. I thought I saw a link for a blog.
Thank you for that. Well, yes, there has been a blog link for about a year now that led to no blog for some time, and my life is finally becoming orderly enough that I am hoping that by early next month I will actually be blogging.
All right, well, Mark, thank you again for joining us. I wish you congratulations on your fantastic career as an artist, both as a visual artist and now as a writer, and I wish you massively continued success.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate your taking time to talk with me, and I'll look forward to talking again in the future.
I scream and shout so you can hear. I tell you that the end is near. I still can't stand, I still can't think. You win me with my favorite drink. Give me that glass, oh, I feel asinine. And if I can't grump, I'll drink plum wine.